Hello everyone, this is part 16 of What If Naruto Was Neglected and Was Trained by Shisui, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Will this really work? Yes, I guarantee it. No one suspects a thing. This is risky, you know. A lot is riding on this. I am aware of this, it's a small price to pay. Did you even think this through? More than you have, I assure you. Don't give me that. This was a spur-of-the-moment decision and you know it. Yet you still agreed, and it worked. Why be skeptical now of all times? We don't know if it worked yet. I say the odds are good since we are both alive. Barely alive. Alive nonetheless. Still, this was too impulsive for my liking. Please, you live on impulsivity. Point taken. Now enough. The signs are showing that it worked. You're too wise for your own good, you know that. Sometimes you have to be. If this fails, it won't look good for you. I am willing to take the risk. TCH. You piss me off sometimes. Touché. Naruto felt his eyes flutter open slowly. His eyelids felt incredibly heavy, and the second he opened them, he just wanted to close them again. His vision was almost completely impaired, being incredibly blurry as he tried to get a read on his surroundings. He could barely make out a spotless white ceiling above his head through the haziness as he ran a hand upwards, blocking out the bright light shining above him. He tried to push himself upwards, but the moment he did, a huge amount of pain ricocheted inside his body, making him gasp loudly. His hoarse tone didn't go unnoticed by him as he smacked his head back against the soft bed he was laying in, his fingers brushing themselves against the soft sheet over his body and gripped tightly. He had to scowl to ignore the immense pain he felt echoing deep into his stomach. Using what strength he had left, he grabbed the bottom of the blue gown he was wearing and lifted it up to reveal his heavily bandaged stomach. His eyebrow rose in confusion as he poked the side, ignoring the jolt of pain he felt from the contact, and brought his finger closer to him. I'm bleeding. That was strange. From the looks of it, he had been bleeding for quite some time. The bandages looked fresh enough, like they were put in him today, but they were already partially soaked with the sanguine liquid. Noticing the small improvement to his vision, he took a long glance around the room he was in. He was no doubt in a hospital room, but he didn't know exactly where he was. He didn't remember anything since his fight with Kisame back in Lighting Country, or even how long he had been out for. Since he was conscious again, he could feel the strength in his body returning with each passing minute. Bending his arms and swinging his legs to get the joints loosened up again as he carefully removed the bloodied bandages around his stomach. He ignored the pain he felt as his fingers grazed his injury. After the blood-soaked appendages were removed, he placed them on the small bedside table before looking at his stomach, his eyes going wide as he finally got a good look at his injury. Holy shit, Naruto muttered to himself, his voice trailing off his lips as he gazed at the new blemish that occupied a good portion of his midriff. It looked like something had taken a deep bite out of his skin from his side. Sharp-looking teeth marks embedded itself into his tanned skin and went all the way to his belly button, hiding it from view. It was a light brown in color, mixed with his normal tan complexion and the amount of blood he had lost, giving off a rustic feel to the mark. That shark bastard, Naruto thought bitterly, his hand clenching into a fist as he started channeling his chakra into the wound to heal it as best he could. Almost immediately he could feel his blood jutsu getting to work on healing him, the small blood tendrils forming from the large gash and sewing him up. He let out a small sigh as he cleaned the excess amount of blood from his stomach. He twirled his free hand, making the copper-smelling liquid peel off his skin and dropping it into the pile of bandages he had removed earlier. After ending the technique, he felt his insides burn, his face morphing into sudden pain as he gripped around his fabric around his heart. Damn, even just using my chakra hurts like a... he said internally, feeling his left eye pulse in pain, matching exactly what he was feeling on the inside. Whatever Kisame had done to him must have thrown his chakra out of whack again, and depending on how long he had been out for would also hold a contributing factor into that as well. He was so caught up in the sudden pain he didn't even hear the doorknob strat to turn as it squeaked open. I'm sure it'll be fine. Naruto felt his eyes go wide as he snapped his head upwards and towards the door. He cursed himself for not paying enough attention to his surroundings. He couldn't even sense any chakra signatures thanks to his injuries, and he could barely even hear when the door had been opened. After realizing he had been walked in on, Naruto quickly jumped out of bed, and across from the person that had entered and leaped to the opposite side of the room. The second he landed, however, a searing amount of pain shot throughout his body, again going deep into his veins as he felt his legs give out from under him and fell to the floor with a loud wheeze. As he fell, he felt someone sidle up next to him, catching his fall before his knees made contact to the ground. Naruto cursed himself again as he tried to look up and see whoever had caught him. While his vision did get better, he was still having a hard time focusing properly, and since the sun had just begun to set, it was making it harder to see in the still darkening room as darkness flooded through the large window behind them. Whoa, careful now, Naruto-ni. Your injuries still aren't healed. Naruto felt his body freeze as the voice reached his ears. His heart felt like it had just dropped 100 stories in his chest and now resided in the deep contents of his stomach with the rest of his pain. His eyes went wide as he hesitantly turned his head to the person holding him up, the deep voice resonating within him as he made eye contact to the all too familiar purple eyes looking at him with nothing short of amusement and small hint of concern hidden deep within those amethyst orbs. Naruto's mouth fell agape, the name uttering off of his lips in pure disbelief. Natsu. Natsu grinned as he nodded his head, finding joy in seeing his brother's apparent distress at seeing him as he helped Naruto get back onto his feet. Naruto was a little hesitant at first, not really wanting to see or be near his brother any more than he already was. They hadn't gotten along when he still lived in Konoha, and he usually was the victim of a verbal onslaught Natsu liked to indulge in. He blinked as that thought crossed his mind, however. If he was in a hospital, and Natsu was here, then there was a very high chance that he was back inside his home village. Keys must have brought us back, using me as a pretense to enter the village safely and without problems, he thought, hiding a grin as he looked away from his brother. Finally accepting the boy's help as he shakily got to his feet. He would play along for now. Naruto kept his arm wrapped around Natsu's shoulders as the slightly taller boy helped Naruto stand fully. Naruto hesitantly muttered a small thanks as he propped himself against a wall, removing himself from his brother as Natsu grinned back at him. Still finding the situation quite enjoyable. You seem better, Natsu said, his eyes glancing at the bundle of bandages on the side table for a moment before crossing his arms. You know it's against policy for patients to remove their own bandages, he finished with a raised eyebrow. The bleeding had already stopped. Naruto dryly replied, finding it quite odd that Natsu was speaking so normal to him. This is the first real conversation they had had in probably over 6 years without Natsu constantly degrading Naruto every chance he got. Natsu felt his eyebrow raise again as he met Naruto's own blue eyes. He found that pretty hard to believe. He was told that his bleeding was almost constant and it was lucky he never died from blood loss, and when he checked earlier he had just replaced the old soaked ones. Really? Lift your shirt for me. Naruto looked at Natsu, slightly taken aback at his brother's request as the redhead took a step closer to him. Naruto took a step away but didn't get very far since he was already fully against the back wall. He was skeptical of his brother, for numerous reasons. The last time he had spoken to him had been years ago back at the ramen shop when he boasted about his sage training. It wasn't a fond memory to have, and everything before that was much, much worse. Natsu noticed Naruto's look of confusion and hesitance and rolled his eyes a bit. While Naruto's reaction was very much justified and not surprising, it was a little annoying for the redhead. Relax, Naruto-ni. Is it so strange for me to want to see your injury? Yes, Naruto replied dryly again, looking at Natsu with an, "Are you serious?" stare. Naruto almost let out a laugh at his brother's ridiculous question, but he managed to hold back surprisingly. Natsu rolled his eyes again, scowling as he took another step towards Naruto. Crouching down and gripping the shirt and lifting it up over Naruto's injury. Naruto didn't try to fight back as Natsu did so. It would make this much easier for him to just accept the weird stance that he found himself in instead of fighting it. Who knows what would happen if Naruto was a step out of line here. His body was still severely weakened. He thought he was better, but it was a false sense of security, and he was sure that if he got into a fight now it would only be a disaster. And since he was technically still a missing nin, the village would have no problem throwing him in prison, or outright executing him outright. The Hokage only had so much power of the laws that the village had to uphold, and that's even if his father fought for him. Naruto looked down to his brother and winced as the shirt grazed his scar again. He watched as his brother blinked in total surprise before lifting his hand upwards and towards Naruto's stomach. Naruto was about to open his mouth to ask what he was doing, but was quickly shut up as Natsu's hand started to glow a soft green as he gently placed his hand over his scar. Naruto was once again coppelty thrown for a loop at his brother's actions. This time acting trying to dispel and see if he was trapped in a genjutsu because of the weirdness of it all. Medical ninjutsu. Yeah. I started learning it after I finished my sage training. On my days off I usually come here to help out since they're low in staff at the moment. Natsu replied, making Naruto shake him in shock. This is becoming a little too much for me, Naruto whispered low enough so that Natsu wasn't able to hear what he said. And that was the truth. This was the last thing he expected to see and hear after he woke up from his comatose state not even an hour ago. Natsu on the other hand ignored his brother's outward shock as he stared at the scar with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Natsu was here earlier when his brother had been dropped unexpectedly from that black-headed member on Narumi's team before quickly explaining the situation to the doctors. Most of them were hesitant to help out a missing nin out, even if he was originally part of this village and the Yondame's child. Luckily Natsu had been working and specifically requested for Naruto to be put under his care until his father had returned. No one argued with Natsu and he was quickly debriefed about the boy's condition even if they were all uncertain on how he had received these injuries. Natsu healed him as best as he could, but no matter how hard he tried to stop the bleeding on the wound, it never did stop. Natsu changed the bandages around his stomach 3 times already and they were always soaked completely in blood. But looking at the wound now it was completely closed up. While the scar would no doubt live forever on Naruto's body, unless he covered it with a seal or genjutsu. The wound was more or less completely closed now, and around him all the blood had already been cleaned up and wiped clean. It was astounding to Natsu, he had never seen anything like it before except for Narumi and himself thanks to the Kyuubi. He snuck a glance at his brother from the floor, a mixture of emotions fighting in his own gut as the fox demon within him laughed loudly at Natsu's turmoil. It seemed the wound closed up completely. Natsu said as he lowered the blonde's shirt, letting it fall back down as Naruto rose to his feet, walking to the door as he grabbed the clipboard that was hanging on the wall, using the attached pen to write down the miraculous recovery of his returned brother. As he did so his eyes stayed trained on his brother, still unsure of what to say, or what to even do. It was much easier when he had been unconscious since Naruto couldn't respond. Naruto was more or less in the same boat as he tried to look everywhere else except Natsu. Still swimming in disbelief as he stretched his sore muscles, finally feeling the pain start to subside as a strange sensation bubbled in his stomach. I can't say how it happened, but you are healed completely. Natsu said, grabbing Naruto's attention as their eyes finally met for only the second time today. But there are a few things that I need to check. Naruto felt his body tense slightly, thankfully Natsu didn't seem to notice as the taller male walked over to him again. Motioning for him to lay back down on the bed which Naruto did with a little hesitancy once again. Natsu placed his clipboard down onto the side table, making sure not to get any blood on it from the removed bandages as his hands started to glow green again checking over the rest of his brother's body. You've changed. Natsu's eyes snapped over to meet his brother's again, the all-too-familiar grin returning to his face as he nodded slowly. So have you. A tense and awkward silence washed over the two brothers as Natsu continued his work. Both not really knowing what to say to one another more than that. Naruto wasn't even sure of what he could say. He wasn't lying when he said he saw none of them as family. Natsu was like the school bully that followed him home and wouldn't leave him alone, he was never once a brother to him in his life. But he couldn't help but realize that change in his brother's attitude or demeanor. It was definitely a change for the better, but still very odd. I do have a few questions. Naruto nodded his head at Natsu, his thoughts still traveling a mile a minute in the small room. Natsu moved his glowing hand upwards making Naruto's breath hitch as his hand flew up to his now closed left eye while his other stayed on his stomach. The tense silence continued for a few minutes as Naruto waited patiently for Natsu to speak. How did you get these injuries? I was fighting a member of the Akatsuki back in Lightning Country. I don't remember much after that. Naruto replied honestly, making Natsu blink once again in surprise as his eyes traveled down to the blonde stomach again. That would make sense, that black-haired kid said something similar I believe. He also said you had been in a coma for about 5 months. 5 months? Naruto asked in shock, not believing it to be so long since he had awoken. He would have guessed it would have been close to 1 month, but 5. That's ridiculous. Natsu nodded, that's what I was told. By who? I don't remember his name. The black-haired kid on Nei-chan's team. Naruto raised an eyebrow again, Nei-chan. Narumi has a team. But what I'm most curious about isn't how you got those injuries. It's this. Natsu looked back to meet Naruto's eyes, ending his medical jutsu as he gently placed his fingers over his left eyelid and put his closed palm on his chest, careful not to induce any pain in his brother. Naruto suddenly felt very tense around Natsu, his eyes had gone blank. Very reminiscent of the younger days together. After looking you over I noticed several, odd discoveries. 2 in particular. One here, he said tapping his eyelid gently, making Naruto stare back at Natsu with an equally blank expression. While there was nothing out of the ordinary, there was a small seal placed just above your eyelid. It's pretty advanced, I would have missed it completely if I wasn't proficient with Fuinjutsu. It's blocking access to your eyes and your nervous system, I find it quite odd, he said, his eyes flashing with questions. He continued, moving his eyes to the blonde's horribly scarred stomach. And most of all, right here. Again I would have missed this completely if I hadn't been looking after I found the seal on your eye. But this seal is even more advanced than the other one. I can't even decipher all the kanji and sealing arrays on it. It reminds me of my seal, the one holding the kyubi at bay. Natsu said, his voice lowering as his amethyst eyes looked over to Naruto's sapphire. Both wearing matching challenging expressions on their faces. But unlike the past, Naruto wasn't afraid to fight back now. Before he would have most likely bitten back in anger at anything Natsu would have said, but this time he was headstrong. He actually had to bite the inside of his cheek to stop himself from grinning several times. That is quite interesting. Naruto responded, fighting back the urge to smirk as Natsu faltered at his response. Natsu seemed to have been caught up in his monologue and found himself stuck in the past for a moment, half expecting Naruto to cave in like he had done when he was younger. Naruto's response was almost playful, making Natsu a little more peeved off than he already was. He did a good job at hiding it, but just like Naruto, he was also having a hard time dealing with this situation. It is. Care to elaborate further, Naruto? Naruto this time did grin, catching Natsu by surprise a little as he looked up to the roof. He sighed heavily. Not really. I think you can deduce what this all means. You have always been the smarter one out of us, right? That seemed to get the desired reaction out of Natsu as he glared at his brother, knowing just how irritated he would get at the challenge. Natsu scoffed, he hated to admit it, but he truly didn't know what it could mean. The seal was similar to his and Narumi's, but with added sealing arrays that he didn't recognize. Minato couldn't leave the village because of a distress call from Narumi, so he couldn't ask him to look at it, which was even more infuriating. He had his suspicions that Naruto was possible harboring a Bayu within him, but he couldn't sense a thing within the seal. Even the kyubi couldn't sense anything, and his sage mode was more or less useless as well and couldn't break through the seal no matter how hard he tried. It was like a puzzle that Natsu had been ignoring for over 10 years and he only just started to piece together. And Naruto wasn't the one who seemed like talking. After all, even if he did use to live here, he wasn't obligated to spill his secrets when he was gone. And it was only a matter of time until the world traveled across the village and the council got involved with his return, even if he was even planning on returning. Each and every time he thought about it, a new question would be brought up about his enigmatic brother. And he wasn't like Narumi, who officially gave up on Naruto. He wanted to know who he was, and what he'd done. And meeting the Akatsuki. Interesting, he thought as he glanced between Naruto's stomach and eyes. Naruto still refused to look at him, but that was expected. I have a few theories, yes. But they are just that, and it would do me no good to tell you since you wouldn't even tell me if I was right. Natsu removed his hands from Naruto's body and stalked his way over to the door again, placing the clipboard back to its original place before meeting his brother's eyes again. Blue met purple once again as they stared silently at each other. The atmosphere grew more and more tense and both remained silent, not wanting to break the heavy tension. Both unwavering in their resolve as their eyes remained unblinking for an absurd amount of time. It was almost like they were looking into a mirror of the past. Natsu could only see the old Naruto. The one that backed away from anything and everything and was easy to walk all over. While Naruto could only see the young Natsu. The boy whose piercing purple eyes would promise pain and torture as he ridiculed him, showed him what it was like to live with such a toxic family. But now they were both different, in many ways, and it only intrigued them further. Naruto was a broken puzzle that was left untouched for years, while Natsu was the perfect vase that was cracking over time from pressure. Natsu grinned before tearing his eyes away from Naruto, opening the door with a soft click as he stepped outside, leaving Naruto to his own devices and once again fully alone. But he couldn't leave without muttering a single sentence. His words were condescending, oozing with arrogance and fanciful in nature. Letting Naruto wonder if Natsu had actually changed at all. Welcome back, Naruto-ni. So let me get this straight. You two ended up killing Hiden of the Akatsuki, an S-class missing nin, and even managed to grab his head for us. That is still talking, Kurunai said, shaking her head in disbelief as she watched the gagged head squirm around in the large puppet's grasp. Keys and Narumi both just nodded their heads to the Junin, both standing with a small amount of pride as they grinned. Most of their injuries had already healed, well for Narumi that was the case. A few bones were still broken for Keys, but she had made an iron sand cast that was holding a few of her broken fingers together and keeping them in place. Yep. Kurunai sweet dropped at Narumi's response. She was finding all of this a little hard to believe as she turned away from the two girls to look behind her, rubbing her bandaged arm that was still soaked with a good amount of blood. Her battle dress was almost fully destroyed. It had been cut up from her legs up, showing much more skin than she usually did as her midriff was left exposed as a large vertical cut laid in the center. Her messy unkempt hair was even more tangled up as she looked at the carnage behind her. Most of the trees in the area were either destroyed or toppled over. Black thread-like materials littered the ground as a single man stood in the center looking down at the heavily cut up and charred body beneath him. Hokage-sama, I assure you he's dead. The now dubbed Minato turned his head to look at Kurunai with an embarrassed smile, reaching up to scratch his cheek with a chuckle. Yes, I know. Just checking over his body just in case. We can't be too certain with a talking head after all, he said, making Kurunai nod in agreement. He did have a point there. The talking head was definitely a surprise, an unwelcome one at that. It was disturbing to see the lone skull wither around as he tried to scream absurdities any chance he got. It was a tough sight to behold. Kurunai was happy though to see that the girls were okay and only suffering from minor injuries and a few broken bones. She has been especially worried when they had gotten separated, but thanks to Narumi she didn't have much to worry about. Before the Namika's daughter went to reconvene with Keys, she handed her one of Minato's famous three-pronged kunai in case of an emergency. Watching Minato put Kakazu's body in a preservation scroll, she was grateful for Yondaim's help. She trusted Narumi and Keys to be strong enough to at least hold off against Hiden for the time being, and even after summoning Minato he didn't seem to worry about her. He had trained her well after all. Minato walked over to the group. He looked perfectly normal and didn't even have a scratch on him. The only sign of battle that Minato hinted at was the small layer of sweat that fell down his brow, but it was barely noticeable. The blonde Kage smiled wide as he waved the scroll in his hand, 2 Akatsuki members down. Great work everyone. Great job giving the Kwani to Kurunai as well, Narumi. Minato praised, making the redhead just shrug her shoulders in response. You told me to use it if I ever came into contact with an Akatsuki member. I just did my job. Minato nodded, chuckling awkwardly at his daughter's response before looking down at the much smaller girl standing next to Kurunai. He caught a glimpse of her before when he was fighting Kakazu, but this was the first time he would speak to her. He had never seen this girl before in his life, but she seemed acquainted enough with his daughter for some reason. He glanced over to his left, locking eyes with the deadpan stare of the floating puppet holding the head of Hiden for a moment. He was vastly curious about who the girl was. She seemed to be controlling the puppet, but he hadn't even seen or sensed the use of chakra strings. He was fascinated by the idea, but he didn't want to jump the gun and ask her outright. He hadn't even introduced herself to her yet. Deciding to do just that, he bent down slightly to her level and offered his hand out to Keys. Good evening. My name is Minato Namikaze, Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. And who might you be? Keys looked at the lone man of the group, glancing between his eyes and the outstretched hand for a few moments. She was deciding on what she wanted to do at this very moment. He was the Hokage, meaning this was Narumi's father. It was a little strange to finally meet the man that Naruto never liked to talk about, just like the rest of his family. Minato gave an awkward laugh again as he crouched uncomfortable at the young girl's questionable gaze on him. He was about to pull his hand away when Keys decided to reach out and took the handshake with a little hesitance. Keys. Good to finally meet you, Hokage-sama. Minato smiled at the girl, making the Keys even more confused as they pulled away from one another as Minato got back to his feet. The feeling is mutual, Keys-chan. How do you know Narumi and Kurunai? He asked. Kurunai spoke up this time, butting into the conversation. Actually, Hokage-sama, Keys here had been traveling with Naruto-kun for the past few years now. But he was dangerously injured a few months ago and accepted our offer to bring him back to Konoha for treatment. Naruto. Where is he now? Minato asked frantically, his pulse quickening as he took a large step forward in shock. Just hearing the name of his long-lost son sent uneasiness into his veins as guilt once again played his mind. Kurunai had to take a step back from the Yondaime's closeness, slightly uncomfortable at the intense reaction, though she couldn't blame him since she had one pretty similar, if not more intense. Sai-kun had agreed to take Naruto-kun back to Konoha while we fought off the Akatsuki members. He should no doubt be back there now, she said, her voice going even as she spoke. We should probably get back. We're finished here. Anyway. Good idea, Kurunai. Everyone grab on. Minato agreed, nodding his head along with Kurunai. They all seemed to agree as well save for Narumi. All nodding along with the village as Minato put his arms around the three girls, already feeling the familiar pull from his Hiraishin kunai back in Konoha. Narumi just narrowed her eyes at the red-eyed beauty as they teleported away, back to Konoha. Finally, I can use my chakra without any pain. Naruto thought as he just finished his stretches for the evening. Right after his brother Natsu left, he quickly got to training in fixing his body up to tip-top shape. He no longer felt any pain in his arms or legs when he moved them around and was able to stay conscious and pain-free long enough to get in a whole workout in the hospital room with no issues. Naruto was also able to start channeling more chakra into his body to heal more of the internal injuries from the large scar on his stomach and even minimize the amount of pain he would feel when he grazed the blemish. Coating it with an almost invisible layer of chakra, letting his blood do the best it can to heal him and stop any throbbing. But externally, he could already perform a small amount of water jutsu and even manipulate the blood he previously took out of his body in the bandages. He barely had any chakra thanks to his coma, and he was using the majority for his wounds, but it was not completely painless. He can even activate his Sharingan with little trouble and could now sense more and more chakra signatures that were near him. After a few days of rest, 1 or 2 tops, he should be back into perfect fighting condition with almost zero problems. The only thing he was worried about now was timing. He had no time to waste now since his plans had already been put into action once he unconsciously stepped foot back into Konoha for the first time, and would be lying if he said he wasn't starting to feel a little nervous. His missing pieces to his plan were currently still missing, and Natsu's presence was sending off warning sirens in his head. His brother appeared to have undergone a drastic change of character over the years. He suddenly was nicer, more sincere and unbearably earnest. It made Naruto sick, no matter who believed Natsu's change, or why he was doing it or for what reason. Naruto wasn't buying it. He knew Natsu better than anyone, especially the darker side he always tried to hide away from their parents and sister. It was almost laughable to a certain extent that Naruto actually let out a loud laugh as soon as he left, unknowingly spooking several passing nurses who were unlucky enough to walk by his room during that time. You can't fool me, Natsu. In fact, you're more important to me than ever, he thought, grinning to himself as he snickered alone in his room, emitting more chakra from his pores as he twirled the blood around the room hastily. 1. To help his control since he seemed to be even better than ever. And 2. It was just fun to let his mind run wild. R.K. Naruto's body tensed as a loud, and all too familiar voice reached his ears. echoing in the hospital behind his room door and into the halls. He felt his grin widen as he stopped his blood manipulation, letting it all pull itself back into the damp bandages as he jumped back onto his bed. He could hear the sounds of approaching footsteps running in his direction as a nurse yelled at the person to stop and slow down. Feeling in the approaching chakra, he got himself ready, flexing his muscles and putting on the weakest look he could muster as the door swung open. Naru-ni. A brown blur shot itself towards Naruto as he braced himself, letting out a whimpered gasp as two tiny arms wrapped around his neck tightly. He chose to ignore the rest of the footsteps coming his way as he weakly wrapped his arms around the brown blur, bringing her closer to him. Hey Keis-chan. He muttered, his voice sounding so weak that the girl sobbed even louder into his neck. I'm so happy you're awake, Naru-ni. I was so worried. Don't worry, I'll never leave you. Miss, you can't come running in here like that. Not only is our patient here incredibly injured, it is rude to all other staff and patients here. A nurse scolded as she ran into the room just behind Keis and tried to peel the sobbing girl away from Naruto. Keis wasn't budging as she just gripped tighter around her knee-chan. She had gone months without him awake and she would be damned if she let go now. Naruto gave a small smile as he looked up towards the nurse, surprising her with an apologetic expression. Sorry about this, nurse-san, but it's okay, you don't have to worry. I missed my sister just as much. Naruto stuttered, coughing a bit, jolting Keis out from her short-term happiness as she finally realized what she was doing. Jumping off of Naruto and bowing deeply to the appalled nurse, I'm sorry, nurse-san, please forgive me. Why, yeah, it's all right. Just don't do it again, the nurse replied awkwardly, not really sure how to take this strange encounter. She bowed respectfully, leaving the two kids to their own devices as she closed the door behind her. As soon as the nurse left the room, it took everything in Kiss's body to stop herself from jumping back onto Naruto. Her face was glowing with pure and utter happiness. Turning her face, she smiled so wide that it looked like it was going to cut her face in half. Ignoring the stream of tears leaking from her eyes as she looked at her brother's face, Naruto returned the smile as he wiped the pain look from his face and let it revert back to his normal expression. Reaching his hand out and letting his rough fingers comb themselves through her brown hair, Keis leaned into his touch, tilting her head to make it easier for him as she gulped her tears back, not being able to fight it anymore. She leaped at Naruto, wrapping her arms around his neck again. Naru-ni, I'm so happy you're awake. I know, Keis, I'm so happy to see that you're okay. Her voice came out as a whimper, burying her face into the crook of his neck as she clung tighter onto him. Naruto's face softened for a moment, letting his arms wrap her even tighter around his side as she cried. He should have expected this, and if he was being honest, he missed Keis just as much. When he was in his coma, he really had no idea on what was happening or going on in the outside world. All he could see was darkness. It had felt like he was drowning in a deep black abyss for eternity. He couldn't even hear what was happening. He thought most people in comas stayed conscious, but sadly, or unlucky, he didn't. He glanced down at his sister, his stomach knotting together as he pulled her away from him. Keis let herself get pulled away with a little resistance. She looked up at Naruto, wiping her tears with her sleeved arm as she tilted her head to him in confusion. Naruto gave her an apologetic smile as he scooted over on the bed to give her just enough space for her to sit next to him as he reached around Keis and across to the side table next to his bed. Keis sniffled as she watched Naruto grab a lone piece of paper a nurse had left earlier. Using his fingers, he dipped the digits into his blood bandages. Making sure it was still wet enough, he began to write on the paper, using his chakra to make the blood a little more dense and easier to write. Keis, I know that I just woke up, but I need you to do something very important, Naruto said as he finished whatever he was writing, folding the paper in fourths before handing it to Keis. The young girl blinked in confusion, looking up at Naruto in shock as she hesitantly grabbed the folded paper gently. I don't understand, Naru-ni. SSHHH. Naruto whispered, bringing his bloodied finger to his lips as his eyes flickered to the door, sensing a few chakra signatures behind the room, recognizing both of them immediately. Keis nodded in understanding as she leaned closer to him, thoroughly confused as Naruto used his free hand to gently cup Kiss's cheek. He leaned in as well, whispering quietly so only Keis could hear what he had to say. I need you to leave Konoha and go to the location in this note. This is very important, Keys, more so than anything we have ever done before. Keys let the surprise show in her face as she looked down to the note now held in her hand. She was a little caught off guard by her brother's serious expression and tone. It was very rare to see Naruto like this, and she preferred it that way. But this was random, more random than usual, especially for Naruto. I don't understand, Naruni. Everything will be explained once you get there, Keys, I promise, he said. Using the hand cupping Kiss's cheek, he lifted her head up to meet her confused golden eyes. His face was deathly serious, lacking any sense of negotiation as his eyes pierced through Keys. Having activated his Sharingan, letting it twist into his Mangekyo as it spun in his socket. Keys shakily nodded her head, not out of fear, but out of concern. She wasn't afraid of Naruto's scary looks anymore, she was forced to grow out of it since she traveled alone with him in tow for the past few months. But she had never seen him act like this before, he was more serious than ever and he hadn't been awake for that long. Something must have happened to him in his last battle against that Akatsuki member, something far worse than she originally imagined. She just agreed with him, taking the note and stuffing it for safekeeping in the seal in her arm. Naruto sighed in relief, giving a sad smile to his younger sister as he gently kissed the top of her head. Thank you, Keys-chan, you have no idea how much you've helped me. Keys blushed a bit at the ISS, her biological brother had never done anything like that before and it was a nice change. She felt her worry melt away at the contact as she nodded to Naruto, a look of fierce determination forming on her face as she jumped off the bed and gave a thumbs up to Naruto. Don't worry, Naruni, you can count on me. And she meant it. Her original plan was to help Naruto find Danzo, but Naruto seemed to care more about this than the old warhawk, so she would help him in any way he needed. With one last goodbye she quickly left the room, disappearing behind the door into her new mission. Keys should have no problem sneaking out of the village, she could easily pass by as an orphan or a merchant's daughter and just walk out of the gates if she chose to do so. Naruto doubted his dad would do anything about it, probably too occupied with his return than anything else right now. Naruto felt himself grin deeply as Keys left, a pulse of adrenaline pumping through his body making him out his fist in his mouth to stop himself from laughing. Step 1, complete. Naruto almost felt giddy for the first time in years. For once since meeting Keys, he felt like he was truly doing something with his life. Like he was doing what he truly was meant to do. The grin did not disappear as he felt an all-too-reconcilable chakra signature make his way closer to his room. It was the signature he was looking forward to the most right after Keys, and he was glad it was happening so fast. Even though his grin didn't vanish, he did feel a bubble of anxiety pop in his stomach. The familiar butterflies appeared with a vengeance as they fluttered around. What could he say? How should he act? They hadn't seen each other in years. How could you tell someone that they've been on your mind almost constantly every single day without it coming off as creepy? He didn't have any more time to think as the door creaked itself open again, allowing the bright room to accentuate the dark raven locks that became visible as deep crimson eyes locked onto his almost instantly as they took the first step into the room. Time seemed to freeze for a moment as both parties stared at one another. Naruto's heart rate substantially quickened in its pace as he looked at the woman in front of him. She was wearing a matching expression of joy and awkwardness as they unmoving at one another. Naruto felt his cheeks heat up significantly as he noticed her attire. She appeared to have not bothered to change since her mission and was revealing a lot more skin than she usually did, more so in the midriff area. He forced his eyes away from her belly button and back to the crimson orbs, scratching the back of his head awkwardly making the woman smile. Hey, Kurunai-chan. Hello, Naruto-kun. Kurunai responded, smiling as she hugged the boy, overcome with her strong feelings as she brought him close to her and momentarily forgetting that he was mortally injured. Luckily for Kurunai, Naruto didn't seem to mind and just let himself be swept away into the embrace, closing his eyes wistfully as he breathed in her familiar scent. She still uses that vanilla and strawberry shampoo, he thought to himself, letting his tenseness be stolen away from the raven-haired beauty. Kurani on the other hand was going through a magnitude of different emotions, and for many different reasons. One of them was how his body felt against hers. He had certainly grown from the small genin that she was used to. He was tall, most likely taller than her and could feel his well-defined body under her own. He looked different too. He had lost a good amount of his baby fat around his cheeks and his hair seemed to grow just a bit longer, not long enough to fall into his eyes, but long enough to cover his eyebrows if he chose to. Pulling away a bit, she locked eyes with the blonde, both wearing matching blushes as Kurunai reached out like she had done many times before, taking his cheek into her hand as she rubbed the button of his scar. Naruto leaned deeply into her touch, missing it more than anything. It was the one thing that reminded him of a better time, and a similar life. And she looked incredibly attractive from this distance. I wish I could marvel in this reunion, but you really tied my hands here. Naruto frowned, his mouth falling lower than ever as a pang of guilt rang through his body. He looked away from Kurunai, not able to look at her half-annoyed and half-angry expression any longer. He truly did feel bad for what he had to do. I know. And I'm sorry for everything. But this was something that I had to do. Naruto said, not feeling an ounce of regret for his actions, just feeling bad for the shitty situation he put Kurunai in. I would understand if you wanted to cut all ties with me after this. Being this friendly with a criminal, and even worse of what you're doing. Kurunai felt herself frowning along with him. Her heart pumping unknown feelings into her as she sighed deeply. Removing her hand from Naruto's cheek with a thoughtful expression. Look, it's not like I wouldn't have done this for you. I care about you, you know, she said bashfully, rubbing her arm as Naruto just blushed under her, their bodies still incredibly close that he could feel the amount of heat they were both emitting. With her ears pink, Kurunai sighed again before reaching into her pouch to reveal a small black scroll and thrusted it towards Naruto. Here, this is what he gave me. Naruto smiled before taking the scroll from her hands, his fingers brushing against hers making both of their blushes expand over their faces. Both feeling a spark go through their systems at the contact. He nodded his thanks, placing the scroll next to him on the table as he scooted on the bed to get a little closer to the woman. Look Kurunai, I don't really wanna hear it Naruto-kun. Kurunai cut him off rudely, taking a step back to further the distance between them making Naruto's heart break at the notion. He looked down, not wanting Kurunai to see the hurt look that flashed across his face as he scratched the back of his head. He felt almost sick to his stomach at the thought of repelling Kurunai away. All the giddiness he was previously feeling vanished in his body and was replaced with deep regret that he managed to drive Kurunai away. But he was in too deep to do anything about it. Can I at least explain myself? So I can tell you why. Naruto whispered, peeking his eyes through his golden locks as he pleaded breathlessly. Kurunai frowned deeper as Naruto spoke, she knew better than to let him explain. She was already in too deep and could simply be called an accomplice to him now. But the look he was giving her was hard to turn down, he looked so incredibly cute and small that it was a hard decision for her. Naruto stared at Kurunai as she stood silent for a long few minutes. It had felt like his heart had gotten ripped from his chest and stomped on repeatedly. Sure, he had done something stupid and rash, and it might have been an impulse decision, but if he could explain himself to her then maybe she could understand. Feeling a little courage returned to him as he watched the woman's face soften, he scooted over onto his bed again, leaving half of it free as he patted next to him softly. Sighing, Kurunai nodded before taking the offered seat directly next to him, both sitting up straight as she turned to look at him. 5 minutes. Naruto nodded thankfully, his smile spreading across his face as he rubbed his hands together. He let his thoughts reverberate in his mind as he tried to gather his thoughts together. It was all a jumbled mess and he would sometimes lose focus as he shoulder brushed against his. It's just I'm sorry. I really ended up doing this to you but I really had no other choice. Things snowballed faster than I thought they would and you were the only person I trusted with this. Why? Why was I the only one you trusted? Kurunai bit back, scowling as she narrowed her eyes towards the blonde boy. Naruto bowed his head down low and sighed deeply, he should have known this was going to happen. Him and his stupid impulse decisions. You're the only person that I truly care about in this village. Sure, I care about my old team, and Sasuke and Shikamaru to a certain extent. But you, he said, feeling his face ignite in a blush as she willed all the courage in himself to look deep into Kurunai's waiting eyes. He gulped loudly before continuing. You remind me of a time where I was genuinely happy. Back when Shisui Nisan was still alive, back when I was still training to be a shinobi. You were there, you may say you didn't do a lot for me, but what you did left more of an impact on me that never disappeared, he said, smiling softly, making Kurunai's heart rate speed up tremendously as the tips of her ears became scorching hot. Naruto chuckled, looking down again as he scratched the back of his head. That time, and those memories mean so much to me. I never forgot them, and I never forget about you, he finished, placing his hand over hers gently. Kurunai wanted to pull away, especially at the loud spark she felt course through her body. But she couldn't find it in herself to pull away, and she didn't know if she even wanted to. Without thinking, she interlocked their fingers together, leaning her head forward until it laid in the crook of his neck, hiding her blush from Naruto's field of vision as she stared at their hands joined together. Her heart rate quicked at the sight, finding it almost insane at the position she found herself in. So what are you trying to say? Is this your way of trying to seduce me onto your side? She asked, roaming her thumbs across his knuckles slowly, making sure to go by each one slowly, enjoying the rough feel of his hands as she subconsciously made herself more comfortable on his shoulder. Depends, is it working? A bit. Not nearly enough though. Naruto chuckled at her response, sneaking a glance to Kurunai before giving off another small frown. I know what I'm asking is still a lot. And I meant what I said, that I would understand if you wanted nothing to do with me. I never said I didn't. But you have to tell me what you plan to do. Naruto blinked in surprise. He was fully prepared for him and Kurunai to walk separate ways after this little moment of theirs. Looking down at his old genjutsu sensei, or friend. He didn't even know right now, but looking at her now he weighed his options out fully. She could help if she knew all of it, but even Keese didn't know what he was doing and he had already sent her away. It was a gamble, but having more people help him out could prove to work in his favor, especially one he was close to. Resting his head against hers, he shut his eyes, getting a good whiff of her scented shampoo as he spoke into her hair, his words coming out muffled. It's kind of a long story. Kurunai huffed exasperatedly, pointing a thumb to the dark skies she pulled away from him, keeping their fingers interlocked as she shifted to get a better look at Naruto, smiling slightly as his eyes flashed with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Using her free hand, she ran her fingers through his golden locks, making sure to keep eye contact as she did so. Kurunai felt Naruto melt into her touch as she spoke, making sure to keep her voice even and stoic. She was still on edge a little due to what had happened earlier, but her curiosity was incredibly piqued, and she was heavily enjoying the closeness she was feeling from the blonde. We've got all night, so you better start talking. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.